Meat City, baby.
Hello and welcome back to Meat City Gaming. JD here with another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video. And today, if you've found yourself in the Sith Raid facing Darth Nihilus, planning your next attack based on his cooldowns, you think you've got the strategy figured out, you do the moves that you think are going to get you through his next wave, set up Unbreakable Will because Annihilate is coming, and then Nihilus doesn't do what you expected him to do, and you wasted your buff. Well, today I'm going to try and show you how you can predict Nihilus's attacks. They are predictable. There is a pattern. This, I think, is the puzzle that the developers were referring to. They wanted this raid to be a puzzle, was one of the descriptions that they used, and figuring out how Nihilus's attacks work is part of the puzzle in Phase 1. So, what we're going to do is first look at Nihilus's attacks. Remember, he uses 2 attacks per turn, and his cooldown does not cycle in between those 2 turns. So if he attacks once and has an ability on a 1-turn cooldown, he cannot use that second attack that's on the 1-turn cooldown because the cooldown will not cycle between his turns. However, he has special abilities on his abilities that reduce the cooldown, and those do count between turns. So for his basic attack, Ceaseless Craving, it reduces the cooldown of Drain, Force, and Annihilate by 1 if the attack dispels any buffs. If he attacks a character with a buff and removes that buff, then the cooldowns drop by 1 for Drain, Force, and Annihilate. And that does happen between his first and second attacks. So there's no natural cooldown, but he can force cooldowns by using his special abilities. The same with Drain Force. Drain Force reduces cooldowns for Nihilus's Annihilate ability by 1 for every debuffed target that is hit. So if you have 5 characters in play and they all have defense down, and Nihilus uses Drain Force as his first attack, his Annihilate ability is going to drop 5 turns before his second attack. So at any time, if Drain Force is going to be used for the first attack and the cooldown is 5 or less, there's a chance he could use Annihilate for the second attack. Then there's Annihilate itself that does not have any cooldown manipulation. And then there's Feed the Void, which is his resummoning of the minions. If he uses that ability while he still has minions in play, it can reduce cooldowns. That's very rarely going to happen in Phase 1. In Phase 4, maybe a different story. But today we're focusing on Phase 1. So what I'm going to do now is go into some scenarios from a recent run through the event, through the first tier of the raid, and we'll see what the cooldown situation is. We'll plan for what the possible scenarios are, and then we'll see what I did. And note, this run was done before I figured out the puzzle, before I kind of really learned how this thing works. So I'm going to make the wrong decision, but we'll still be able to learn from it. So scenario 1 is Nihilus's first turn. This is before Nihilus goes. Whenever you start the raid, this is the situation you're going to be in. He will have his basic and his force drain abilities ready to go. So what Nihilus does is he prefers to use his abilities right to left. He will use the rightmost ability that is available whenever he can, and then he'll work his way to the left. So Nihilus's first move will always be Drain Force. And this is really important because if his first turn reduces the cooldown of Annihilate by 5, you've really shortened the time before that first Annihilate comes, and you're going to have to use Unbreakable Will really early. If you are able to keep no debuffs on your characters, Drain Force will have no cooldown reduction, and then itself will go on cooldown, and then you're going to have way more time to prepare for the first Annihilate. So we're in the situation here. You can see I have 1 turn left. It's going to be Kenobi's going to get to go, and then it's going to be Nihilus's turn. Kenobi has his basic and his call to assist. And so you may be thinking, this is a raid, we got to get some damage done. Use that mass call to assist. That's certainly what I did, and let's see how it turns out. And the aftermath is some damage. We knocked his protection down, but I now have 4 characters with defense down. Because Kenobi's mass call to assist calls characters to use their basics, they all get the defense down buff. So now I've got 4 debuffs. Nihilus is 1 turn away from going here, and he's going to reduce the cooldown of Annihilate by 4 on his Drain Force attack. Then he's going to use his second turn to do his basic. Drain Force will go on cooldown. He'll use his basic. And if his basic takes any debuffs away, that's going to be a further cooldown reduction. So that could be up to 5 based on this next turn. So let's see what happens. So we can see Nihilus's Annihilate cooldown on his first turn starts at 7, and now for his second turn, it's all the way down to 2, all because of my mistake with General Kenobi. Notice it would have gone down to 1, but Kenobi had Foresight, so the basic attack didn't hit Kenobi, so it didn't remove debuffs, so it didn't cycle the cooldowns. So in theory, if you have the worst case scenario, if you have all 5 of your characters with a debuff, and Nihilus uses his Force Drain, he reduces his cooldowns by 5. If he follows that up with his basic and strips buffs off of a character, he reduces his cooldown by 6, and it naturally drops 1 at the end of his turn after both attacks. That drops 7. So if you do the worst thing you can do, Nihilus can have Annihilate ready for his second attack. And that is the key here. If he's doing Annihilate that early, it's going to affect the outcome of your run. This also highlights how good a mechanic Foresight is on your own characters, because it stops not only Drain Force from affecting a character. Even if you have a debuff, if you have Foresight, the attack will miss, so it won't count as a cooldown reduction. And if you have it on a character that Nihilus tries to use his basic on, again, the hit won't land, he won't strip the debuffs, and there will be no cooldown reduction. So that is the biggest tip to come away from. Going into Nihilus's first turn, don't use basics on Nihilus. Spread your specials on Nihilus if you have to, and use your basics on the adds that are there until Nihilus uses his Drain Force ability. Okay, so here we are in the second scenario. We've advanced time a little bit, and we can see that Nihilus has just his basic attack ready, and Annihilate is on a 1-turn cooldown. So the maximum reduction of cooldown that Nihilus can get with his first attack is going to be 1. If he strips a buff, he'll reduce his cooldowns by 1, and he'll use Annihilate with his second attack. So Annihilate is in play here, so we need to think about what to do. And basically, there are a couple of options, and you can tailor this to how risk-averse you want to be. Right now, the characters that I have in play, we're going to have Thrawn go, and then Chirrut will go, and I don't think Kenobi would have time to go. It'll be Thrawn, Chirrut, and Nihilus based on the turn meter that we can see. So right now I have 2 of my 5 characters with buffs. If Nihilus attacks either one of them, he will remove those buffs, and then he'll get to Annihilate. So if you're okay with taking the risk, you want to go big or go home, well, then you have a better than 50% chance of Nihilus not reducing his cooldowns and not using Annihilate. So you could play it risky. You can say, I'm going to take my chances, 2 out of 5, 2 out of 5 chance of failure, 3 out of 5 chance of success, and I'm going to not use my Unbreakable Will, and I'm going to see what happens, and hopefully I get lucky. And if I don't, I'm okay retreating and restarting my run. Or if you're having a good run and you're okay playing the sustain game and you're just trying to get your solid target damage in, you're not going for a max damage run, well, then what you can do what I do, and we'll see what that is here. We use Thrawn's turn swap ability to put Kenobi to 100% turn meter, and Kenobi has the Unbreakable Will buff, so he puts Unbreakable Will up on himself, and then he doesn't have any other buffs, and he's forcing Nihilus to attack him. So when Nihilus attacks with his basic, there's no cooldown reduction. His second attack must be a basic again, because there was no cooldown reduction on the first attack, and there is no natural cooldown reduction between the attacks. So it's a double basic at Kenobi, and then for his next turn, Annihilate will be ready. So we can see that that's exactly what happened. Now, maybe you see this as a mistake because now I burned an Unbreakable Will and I didn't use it to stop and annihilate. And that's fair. Again, if you want to go for the big risk, then that's not the right play, the one that I did. But it actually ends up working out as I advance the video here and we play through how the rest of this turn went. I then sent all of my attacks at Nihilus, sped his turn meter up, and I was able to get him to go again before Kenobi. So the Annihilate ends up going to the Unbreakable Will anyway. So it does work out. And we can see, we once again can predict the attacks that are going to happen here. Annihilate is going to happen first because it's the farthest one to the right. And then it's going to follow up with a basic because Annihilate cannot reduce cooldowns. So there we go. It actually worked out. Unbreakable Will soaked up the Annihilate. And now we're back to steady state. Looking at Nihilus' turn meter, the next thing that he's going to do, we know. First, he's going to resummon his allies, the far right ability. There will be no turn meter reduction, cooldown reduction on that because he doesn't have any allies in play. And then he's going to use Drain Force again. So, planning ahead, you want debuffs gone for this next turn. Do anything you can to use specials to get that defense down debuff off of your characters. Because again, if he has 5 up here, Annihilate could be ready. Or, if you can get rid of all the debuffs on your characters, Annihilate is going to stay at a 5 cooldown. He's only going to lose 1 off the cooldown because of taking his natural turn. So, always be watching. Drain Force is the important one. Have your debuffs gone when Drain Force is in play. So his next turn here, I'm going to show, it's going to be Resummon Allies and then Drain Force. And as you can see, I've removed all the debuffs from my characters. So Annihilate is only going to drop down 1 to a 5-turn cooldown after Nihilus takes his turn. And there we go. The allies are back up. Annihilate did not get reduced very much, and we're ready to roll into the next turn. And we know his next turn is going to be guaranteed to be back-to-back basics. Basic attack first, he's only going to be able to remove at most one cooldown, and that means he has to use his basic again. So he could end up with 2 cooldown reductions by the end of his turn, but not enough to not need to use his basic on that turn. So for this next scenario, we're going to do a little pop quiz. What do we want to do here? Based on what we've learned, based on what we've seen so far, what is the goal of this next turn? What's Nihilus going to do, and what should our strategy be to try and prevent Annihilate or reduce the chance of Annihilate coming at us? So I'm going to give you a couple seconds. Think about it. Pause the video if you want. And we're going to roll right into the answer now. So, working right to left, it's going to be Drain Force first. If Drain Force can reduce the cooldown by 2, if he hits 2 characters with a debuff, he'll have Annihilate ready, and he will use it on his second attack. So, main objective here, don't use 2 basics before Nihilus's next turn. Unfortunately, as the video plays here, we're going to see that I don't really have that option. Thrawn is up, and of course I'm going to use Fracture, because it's good to use it whenever you can, but also because it will not put a debuff on Thrawn. But then we're going to have 2 more characters go. As you can see the turn meter, both Luke and Han are going to have turns, and they're both forced to use their basics because they don't have another attack ready to go. So that's going to put 2 debuffs on my characters. Nihilus drains Force and basics. Wait, what happened? I thought we said if there were 2 debuffs on my characters, he was going to use Annihilate. So I guess I don't know what I'm talking about, and this whole video was a waste of time. Not quite. The last trick was Commander Luke Skywalker had Foresight, so the Drain Force did not hit Commander Luke. It only hit Han, and it only reduced the cooldown by 1. So he had to use his basic with his second attack, and then after the second attack, his turn ended, which caused a 1-turn cooldown reduction again, and that means Annihilate is now ready for his next turn, but was not ready for this turn. So that was all because Commander Luke had Foresight on him. If Commander Luke didn't, it would have been 2 debuffs, it would have been Force Drain, and then it would have been Annihilate. So, bit of a tricky one there, but you can see how there's these really cool interactions. Again, it's still a frustrating raid because of the tenacity, because you can't really manipulate or debuff or make Nihilus do anything you want, but you can slow him down, you can play the game, and you can manipulate his attacks by preventing the big ones from coming as long as possible. He's going to eventually get Annihilate off, but there are a lot of things you can do to prevent it from coming sooner than it has to. And this is the last one. Again, just a wrap up, just a review. We can see things are already starting to fall apart. I've lost General Kenobi, but we have Nihilus with Drain Force ready and his basic. So again, Drain Force is going to be the first attack he uses on his turn. If he can reduce the cooldowns by 3, he'll use Annihilate. If he can't, he'll use his basic. So that is how Darth Nihilus works. That is how you can read Darth Nihilus's mind. You can figure out his attacks and you can plan accordingly. One last note for this run, you can see my damage total was not impressive. I ran my Titans team. This was our second tier 6 run, and I substituted Chirrut in for R2-D2, and I lost about 200,000 damage from my first run to my second. So bad substitution. I thought a healer would be good. I will probably try Chirrut instead of General Kenobi, knowing what I know now. Basics are bad. Debuffs are bad. I have a better understanding of the mechanics, and I think having a healer is needed, but put him in place of my tank, not in place of R2-D2, who throws out a lot of buffs. And so we'll see how that goes with our next run. Hopefully, I can not only beat my current run that you have on the screen, but my best run from the first time I did the raid when I really didn't understand the mechanics. So hopefully this helps you guys get a little bit of an edge up on this very difficult phase of the raid. If you enjoyed the video, if it was helpful, I would leave a comment. I would appreciate if you leave a comment, leave a thumbs up, let me know what you think. If you do something differently, if you have a special team that uses the mechanics differently or approaches things differently, feel free to share that information as well. We're all working together to try and get a handle on this raid as quickly as we can. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.